I want to put on record the Social Democrats' appreciation for all the work and dedication of those in the front line on this issue, those in healthcare, those ensuring the supply chain of food, medicines and other essential goods, and those who are keeping us safe in our communities, and also those who are reliably informing us about what we need to know. I also want to thank the public who are leading from the bottom up in demonstrating their ability to distance themselves socially, in self-schooling, washing their hands and doing what is asked of them. And I also want to acknowledge the anxiety we're hearing and seeing, and that goes way beyond the risk of infection. It's about concern for others, but it's also about the anxiety of putting food on the table, about paying the rent or the mortgage, paying bills, concern about the ability to reopen or reboot a business after this pandemic passes, and it will pass. The leadership from the bottom up is also about the public seeking the early school closures, about the cancelling of the mass gatherings, about the travel restrictions and about closing pubs. It was done and it was certainly very obvious that there was a mood that was there, and it was done in the knowledge that it would hurt, but that what would hurt more was not doing it and not doing it in time. The bill we're here today to pass is needed, and it's in the main proportionate and it's balanced in the circumstances, but it does need some strengthening, and we'll play our role in both strengthening it and passing it. We've seen numbers modelled in recent days, and that's only right and proper, and we hope that the measures that have already been taken will have overstated what plays out. But the modelling the numbers is not merely about an exercise in maths. It's about calculating the response, both in terms of healthcare needs and available resources, but also about modelling further measures, such as restrictions in movements. And while that is stated in the legislation, what is largely absent is what kicks in and when. It's essential that we're not behind the curve, but also it's essential that it's proportionate. There's economic modelling going on as well, and I just noticed that the ECB have announced a 750 billion pandemic emergency purchase programme, and it's essential that we understand what is available from the European institutions or from the central bank and how that is intended to work, and that we make full use of it. Before we become sick, we need to be planning on our recovery, and that includes our nation's economic recovery. We're hearing a lot about delays in testing, and I know that that has been scaled up as we speak. If someone has symptoms, of course they need to self-isolate, but as already has been said, there's issues with some of the definitions where people are queuing and may not be a risk. There's also an issue with definitions. For example, if someone is advised to isolate because their immune system is compromised but they're not symptomatic, do they qualify for a payment? What is the definition, or can there be an expansion in the definition of that? And also there is a bit of confusion, and I think it could be helped with a briefing about adult and child dependence, about what people are entitled to. Because, for somebody to discover that they have a family of 5 and what they're hearing is maybe they have a payment of €203, that is an unbelievable shock, where they would have had an income that was a sustainable income before this. I think it's also important to highlight that there has been instances in the past where we've had emergency legislation. I remember the IBRC legislation. It was presented to us before midnight and it was passed before dawn, and there were problems later on. So it's essential that we consider, the wording of this legislation, and that we make sure that it's as robust as it can be. It's just as important as we pass the legislation. And the ICCL and Sage Advocacy have both expressed a need for the sunset clause and for other measures, and indeed I welcome the fact that the Minister for Health has said that he will work with the opposition on that. I appreciate the Minister and the Government's bona fides on the intent of this bill, but I think it's really important that it really is stated comprehensively as possible that this relates to COVID-19. This is bespoke legislation, and that there's no equivocation on, and I don't believe there's any equivocation, but there is no doubt about that, and that message goes out. It must may not be the only piece of legislation that's needed. Some of it may well be fairly minor pieces of legislation. I know Deputy O'Callaghan, I heard, is an amendment in on, for example, extending the statute of limitations, particularly in civil cases, and I think that that makes complete sense. And also there would be limits, for example, on planning legislation, where it might require people to go out and actually adjudicate on site. They may not have the technical staff available. There are things like that that are relatively minor in the overall scheme of things, but are important, and it's prudent to put them on the record. The bill makes provision for emergency payments. I think it's really important that, for example, the logistics of that is considered, and, for example, the community welfare officers need to be given additional staff and more resources, because there will be exceptional need payments. And indeed, I would like to, to thank the staff in that department, because they're certainly going beyond the call of duty. The bill doesn't preclude us from talking about other separate pieces of legislation, and I welcome the fact that the Minister has said that there is a piece of legislation due on housing, and particularly, I don't know what the scope of that is. You might just outline the scope of what's intended, or maybe the Minister will give us a briefing on that, because I hope at the centre of that will be that the issue of evictions will be dealt with, and particularly during this emergency. I continue to see individuals and families, I saw 4 of them on Friday morning alone, were in an absolute panic because they had eviction notices, and they were finding it impossible to find alternative accommodation. It's difficult to see such scenarios living side by side, I've got to say, which something we saw in recent weeks was luxury apartments that couldn't be set because the rents were so exorbitant. There's got to be things that can be done about things like that. I think Airbnb may well release more accommodation, may well be released because of the impact on the tourism sector, and that hopefully will fill some of the need. I'm being told, because of the reduction in staff, for example, that housing assistance payments are being delayed. For someone making an application for that now, or for someone who is in receipt of payment and has lost their job, there are real serious concerns there. For example, if somebody who gets a HAP payment doesn't pay their portion of the rent, the complete payment stops to the landlord, and then the tenant becomes ineligible in the future. So they're real practical issues that maybe could be dealt with under Article 38 of the legislation in relation to rent assistance.